In the early 20th century, the land of Palestine was under British control as the British Mandate for Palestine. In 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, declaring its support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, despite the fact that the majority of the land's inhabitants were Palestinian Arab. This pledge marked a betrayal in the eyes of many Palestinians, who saw the British shift as favoring Zionist ambitions while disregarding Palestinian rights and self-determination. Over the following decades, British policies facilitated Jewish immigration and land acquisition in Palestine. As the tide turned toward 1948, Britain withdrew its mandate, leaving behind a legacy of division and conflict. Many Palestinians view Britain's role as enabling the creation of a Zionist state at their expense, allowing one people to establish sovereignty while displacing another. The British government itself later acknowledged being proud of the role it played in establishing the Israeli regime. When the State of Israel was declared in 1948, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled or fled from their villages. Events that would become known as the Nakba catastrophe. The land that many Palestinians had lived on for generations would now fall largely under a state that, many contend, had been built on their dispossession. Over the following decades, Israel expanded into the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, imposing military occupation and settlement expansion. Throughout this time, the role of the United States loomed large. The U.S. has provided military, diplomatic, and economic support for Israel, often shielding it from international accountability, even as reports of mass civilian casualties and systematic violations emerged. In effect, many Palestinians and human rights observers argue the U.S. has remained silent or complicit, enabling Israel's actions through its backing. As the 21st century progresses, what many call occupation has morphed into something far more pervasive. According to Amnesty International, Israel enforces a system of oppression and domination against Palestinians across both Israel proper and the occupied territories, constituting the crime against humanity of apartheid. That system includes massive land seizures, dispossession, movement restrictions, demolition of Palestinian homes, denial of citizenship or residency rights, and segregation of infrastructure and services. In the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Israeli forces and settlers carry out daily raids, violence, demolitions, shootings, and arrests of Palestinians, many civilians, many children. For example, a report by the Palestinian Center for Human Rights documented that in March 2024 alone, Israeli forces killed 37 Palestinians in the West Bank, including 12 children. In the same period, 80 Palestinians were injured, many children and even medical personnel targeted. In 2023, the number of Palestinians killed in the West Bank rose to the highest recorded since the UN began tracking in 2005. In the Gaza Strip, the scale reaches crisis proportions. Israel's blockade of Gaza, enforced over many years, restricts goods, movement of people, fuel, water, medical supplies, and more. The humanitarian consequences are severe. Limited access to health care, clean water, electricity, the local economy devastated, generations of children growing up without normal childhoods. Human rights groups say Israel uses starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. Fast forward to recent years. The enclave of Gaza has been under near constant siege conditions, punctuated by major Israeli military operations, including aerial bombing, ground invasions, and tight control of goods, humanitarian access, and infrastructure. For example, from October 2023 onward, during the 2023-24 Gaza war triggered by the 7th October attack by Hamas on Israel, the humanitarian toll on Palestinians has been catastrophic. A key fact, according to internally held Israeli military intelligence data made public, by May 2025, only about 17% of the Palestinians killed in Gaza were recognized by name as fighters, meaning around 83% of the dead were civilians. Other studies estimate that by mid-2024, the death toll traumatic injuries in Gaza was around 64,260, suggesting serious undercounting by official Palestinian authorities. Human rights bodies flagged that women, children, and the elderly suffered massively, and that many bodies remain under rubble, many hospitals and schools destroyed. Infants, children, and women have been repeatedly highlighted as victims. For example, in a UN-documented investigation of military operations in Gaza from October to December 2023, by end April 2024, of the 24,682 identified dead, 7,356 were children and 5,419 were women. In addition, the collapse of infrastructure, the blockade preventing food, water, fuel, medicines, and the enforced displacement of close to 90% of the population have driven many to extreme conditions of malnutrition, disease, psychological trauma, and death. According to Human Rights Watch, HRW, Israel's demolition of homes and infrastructure forced displacement of up to 90% of Gaza's population, over 1.9 million people in the 2023-24 period, represent war crimes and crimes against humanity. The allegations of mass civilian deaths are deeply troubling. Entire families have been wiped out by airstrikes in Gaza. For example, one case documented by Amnesty International involved 15 members of the Aldous family, spanning 3 generations, destroyed in a single strike, and among the victims were an 18-month-old toddler. The targeting of civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, mosques, has been repeatedly flagged by UN experts and NGOs. In June 2025, a UN commission concluded that Israel committed the crime against humanity of extermination by killing civilians sheltering in schools and religious sites in Gaza. Women and children suffer severely. A UN report from 2025 found that attacks on maternity wards and women's health care in Gaza amount to genocide acts. The report accused Israeli forces of using sexual violence as a weapon and deliberately inflicting conditions to erode Palestinian reproductive capacity. These findings point to a pattern: the destruction of civilian life, the denial of safe passage or evacuation, the targeting of places that should be sanctuaries, the refusal to allow adequate aid or reconstruction. Beyond killing and destruction, there is the denial of basic rights. Palestinians in occupied territory face movement restrictions, checkpoints, the separation barrier, curfews, closures, fragmentation of their land into enclaves. Settlers illegally expand onto Palestinian land under the protection, or at least the acquiescence, of the Israeli military. The result? A map increasingly carved into disconnected pockets. These policies amount, according to human rights law, to forcible transfer, collective punishment, and systematic discrimination. Meanwhile, accountability is effectively absent. Amnesty and HRW note that investigations by Israeli authorities are rare, prosecutions even rarer. The military justice system largely shielded from independent oversight. So while violations continue, responsibility at the highest level goes unpunished. And this lack of accountability reinforces the cycle. When we look at the long arc, from British facilitation via the Balfour Declaration, to American support, to ongoing Israeli military settlement and administrative policies, the narrative for many Palestinians is one of betrayal, occupation, brutal suppression, and international silence. The British set the stage for a Zionist state that would expel or suppress Palestinian sovereignty. The Americans continue to back Israel politically and militarily while offering little tangible redress for Palestinian suffering. Israel carries out sweeping policies of dispossession, violence, blockade, and occupation, while the rest of the world watches, intermittently expresses outrage, but rarely forces structural change. The land of Palestine became territory of one people, and the original people of that land were left stateless, cut off, controlled, confined, and denied. Will the children of Gaza ever know freedom? Will those who died, whose homes were destroyed, whose land was taken, ever receive redress?